This is the Police Training HQ Podcast. We are your headquarters for all things training and resources for Texas law enforcement. Welcome back to Police Training HQ Podcast, Episode 10. Mike, how are you, sir?
Doing good. Episode 10. Wow, we're in the double digits.
We are salty freaking veterans at this point.
Mostly salty. I don't know about the veterans part yet.
I do have a high sodium content.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
well,
true.
we're gonna keep going with what I hope everyone enjoyed with Episode 9, which was that comfort versus competence discussion. Sorry about the little bit of audio problems, but I still think that there was great substance in that.
I think it was a great discussion.
And definitely we were poking, but I think for the benefit of course, for training, and we're going to keep going with. I think it's one of our favorite things, but we're going to erase some dogma today. We might talk about a couple of methodology things, but in keeping with our autonomy, relevance, and practical application, and then on the line of no more comfort, let's talk about more competence-based teaching. And I want to dig down deeper into this in this episode, specifically teach back, something that you and I talk a lot about, where frankly, we have good evidence that when a student is forced, even shortly after a lesson, is forced to teach back, there's actually some kind of rewiring of the brain.
Yeah, I mean, and if we dive into this, I think obviously a discussion about why it works and how it works, and certainly the brain chemicals and the retrieval practice, and then how we've built that sort of stuff into our courses. I mean, search and seizure, force, penal code, we apply it everywhere. And I would say, at least for this episode, if you're still lecturing like it's 1989, you better buckle up, because we're going to throw some, for some of you, maybe some radical ideas.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It's we're not going to, maybe you and I can do a Prince parody where we teach like it's 1999, but in a negative connotation.
I think I said 1989. I'm old,
Yeah.
though, so 1999 might have been in your era, but
Hey, I was alive. I wasn't old. I was a single digit, but I was still. Hey,
well, single digits. Now we're in double digits for the podcast, so
that's right.
we're moving along.
That's right. We're a perfect 10 today, and so I want to kill a myth up front. Teach backs are first and foremost. It's not a random pop quiz. It's not I'm going to get them up there and embarrass them, or a hazing moment. It's also not aimed at students that aren't quite competent with the material, as competent as others. It's actually structured for retrieval. It's built to prioritize information and fire the brain's learning systems quickly, so that way, when hey, it's your turn to teach back this small moment, you're also going to be intentionally focused on your teammates who are going through the same problem that you're going through. Problem being the teach back. And we've talked a little bit about student reciprocity, and this is one of them. This is how we get them fired up.
Yeah, I think maybe there's this impression that it's overly complex. The fact is, it's pretty simple. I mean, you teach something, because it's not like we're getting out of the teaching business here with our students, but you teach something, probable cause, levels of force, something out of search and seizure, and then you have the cadet explain it back to you or to their classmate, or even more formal, you have them do maybe a presentation at the board. And we're not looking for word for word, so to speak. Want to hear their version of it, and I think it pushes the brain to work in a different way. And I'll be honest, I think we've both seen sort of that magic that starts to occur from a retention standpoint.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. It is sort of magic. I think there's an unfortunate reason, though. So I want to kind of dive into maybe the first question, and I'm going to pose it to you, and I'm happy to share in it too. Is okay. So if you were right now, you were the coordinator of your FTO program, and inside of your program, you wanted your students to say, all right, or I'm sorry, your FTOs to just have the new recruits recite back a definition of probable cause, but perhaps they don't really know it. They're just reciting it. They're not recalling anything. They're just something that they've quoted, kind of like the ethics phrase or whatever. Would you be content with that?
Oh no, not at all. I need to see them go beyond and apply the learning. It, Policing is practical application with real world consequences, obviously outside the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. My thing is, I see it all the time. A teacher comes in and like they want you to remember the use of force continuum or just remember probable cause. But I think where teach back starts to make it a little more effective, it's not just a recognition of a phrase or a group of words. It's making them retrieve it in a way that's active or active recall. And one of the perhaps the ways that we can liken it, it's kind of like a workout, like a neurological workout. We've talked about that fatty stuff on the myelin, or I'm sorry, on the sheath between these neurons, right? That I use it in our classroom as a for our listeners kind of benefit. I know you can't see me, but if I throw a baseball at somebody who hasn't played, but they've practiced for so long, they're still going to hit it before it smashes them in the face because they've learned how to do it fast. It's myelinated, and then I think you're starting to force that kind of that smooth sheet around the neurons and their pathways faster and more durably.
Yeah, I mean it's the reps, just like going to the gym, except here we're looking for cognitive gains, and when we have that level of cognitive gain, I think that ties to better decision making on the street. The mental repetition is key, but I also think that when the student has to take the information and teach it back, it's sending a message to the brain, I need to hang on to this information. I think we've talked before about our brains, this constant filter mode, and it's trying to decide, is this important for me to hang on to when I go to sleep tonight? Do I need to put this into long-term memory? But I think with this approach, the brain is maybe forced to give in and hang on to the information because we're having this external, I guess, external assignment for the student that puts them in a position where they have to almost instantly use the information. And when the brain sees it needs to be able, or it needs to use it, then it's going to recognize it as important. And when it's important, it's probably going to hang on to it a little bit better.
Yeah, and I want to wrap back around to something you said earlier, which is you and I are by doing stuff like this, you're not abandoning teaching. I really appreciate that comment because I could see it's conceivable at least that should you be like maybe you're teaching like 1989, where that's your role, or maybe you see that your role is the authoritarian, where that this might look a little chaotic and it might appear that you're not teaching anything, but certainly if somebody teaches it back, wouldn't it be our role to correct that and add our nuance in? Or maybe that's when you add a memory aid or something. It does require us to be quite ready for class, we being the instructors, but it isn't the negation of teaching. It's a modality. It's just a different way.
It is, and I think it's diagnostic for us. It's like, what did I miss when I covered the material, or what do I need to stress more to see that in the student teach back? I think that's an important um, important part of this that maybe we don't always recognize.
Yeah, and the other question is, I think I think adults, they seek what is comfortable. We've had that conversation last time, but there is one thing that will keep your students intentionally focused, which you and I both know, and I think we'll talk about it in a later episode, how to keep students intentionally focused. You and I have been approached about this, and we'll be told that the instructor won't quote unquote engage, but you and I both know that, like in a basic instructor class, when our students say, well, I want to engage the students, what they're saying is talk, tell a funny story, maybe even tell a story from the past. But you and I both know that what we mean by that is dopamine, that little reward hit that you get from a lot of things. But in this case, for teachbacks, what's going on in that hopefully 8 pounds or somewhere near that of gray matter upstairs is just a little bit of, I got this right. I have a new role in class where I get to stand up as opposed to sit down, little bit of blood going to the corpus callosum, and then reward. Reward is so powerful. The brain loves it. It flags things as important because of that reward. And not only that, but it would be really silly if we threw out Milky Ways every time an adult got something right. So this is the type of reward that I would go back for over and over again.
Milky Ways. You're going to have a bunch of recruits putting on some weight in the academy when you do that.
Yeah, and just crazy sugar highs.
Well, and you think about, because with what you're saying, so if you're teaching for an hour straight without something rewarding, a teach back or whatever, you're talking at the brain, not with it. And I would say that's not a reward. For a lot of students, that's going to be torture. If you're just droning on about a particular topic with your little PowerPoint slides behind you, and I'm not sure that the student's brain is getting the reward that it's probably looking for. I think that's a really big thing that instructors ought to be keeping in mind when they're teaching or designing how they're going to teach. If you're going back to building out a lesson plan and you're the type of person that needs a lesson plan to teach from, then use your instructor notes to put some of those activities in where we're getting the students doing teach backs and some of the other things that the practical application part is put in play.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the mechanisms that, I don't know how deep you want to go into it, but with myelination and with the right magic, there's also this dendritic connection that happens. You and I spelled it out, and if you'll remember, I think you and I took a trip down to, it was either McAllen or somewhere where I nerded out on brain-centric design book, and I was drawing dendrites because I didn't really understand what it meant. But those are those, again, for the listener, sort of little tails and fingers that go out to connect to other information. And with a stronger connection, just I think, and maybe correct me if I'm just underutilizing this, but or misrepresenting it, but this is the short to long term mechanic in the brain where it sort of starts to connect, myelinates, and then really no matter what, I have a strong enough connection to retrieve it at will.
No, I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah, and so when we build a class, sometimes we teach things around a scenario, but you know that we don't go very long without some type of teach back or some type of, hey, let's turn it back over to our students to help guide it. For instance, this new course that we're designing and going to put out soon, basically because I believe adults learn by experience and have experience, which changes a little bit. I mean, I'm not just going to go in there and talk for hours. I'm going to have them teach back sections that, although it starts with this need to know, need to reference, maybe some of the things we need to know, have them teach back and prioritize, hey, I don't know this and I need to get better at it, which is cool. That's what I'm there for. Or help memorize it a little bit better. As an example.
I think, too, that maybe we should point out, because I could see how this might sound like we're just asking questions and looking for their response. but it's deeper than that. It's turning the teaching back to the student with information that they may have just heard, or they come back for a second day of class on the same topic and they've been told be ready to teach it back. Well, we didn't say go home and study. We said go home and be able to teach it back. So I will assure you that if they take that sort of assignment seriously, their brain's going to work in a very different way. And the investment in that, when they come back and they do a good job in front of the instructors and their peers, is a huge, huge reward to them. And I think that maybe that's the biggest misconception that I fear that we're not kind of drilling down to is it sounds like we're just putting a fancy name on a question and answer session, and it's way deeper than that. I assume that we're sort of on the same page with that. I know you and I are. I just wanted to throw that out there for our audience.
Oh yeah, well, and I think it actually we might want to talk about it because as we discussed a little bit last episode, that episode was sort of birthed, or the impetus behind that was because of some criticism that it's kind of like these are silly little nuanced games that we play in class to help students feel more energetic, or like you and I are putting in some kind of brain sugar so that way they can stay awake. But it's evident in the outcomes, which is going to be outcomes is actually one of our future really closely related to this. It's not too far in the future. We're going to discuss outcomes and testing, but no, this is taking what is probably the preponderance of a student's experience, which is going to be related to, like you said, I think the opposite of what we know is true, which is the student might speak more than us, but that doesn't mean that we're not on the board. We're not making handouts before class. We're not, prescribing exactly what we want them to do. And so it's not just a game, to drill down a little bit deeper to it.
No, and I'm not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Maybe an example, maybe a topic that you teach, and maybe some of the teach back assignments would be helpful for our audience to kind of get their head around this. At least following our model. It's not the only way to do it, but at least an example of how you do it in the classroom, I think would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I feel like things that need to be explained well needs to have reciprocity to it, meaning there are things that you and I know because we should. We're experts in the field, and like, for instance, Fourth Amendment. I've talked as recent as today, in fact, just an hour ago, about a Gantt search, Arizona versus Gantt, and the limitations that it created. Not limitations, but the way that it structured Belton, or restructured Belton. And so, because I knew those were points of emphasis, I wanted to drill down in that. And so I had actually cadets teach Arizona versus Gantt, comparing it to things like Carroll Doctrine, which we know is closely related. And as you know, there's sort of a limitation in prong 2 of Arizona versus Gantt, which requires a officer to be able to recognize that there needs to be, quote, reason to believe that more evidence or crime-related evidence is in the car. And when you have students at the board teaching back and they're catching themselves mid-teach back, talking about things like officer safety, and when the driver was arrested, that changes from a Carroll search to a Gantt search. And even if they're wrong in the moment, they're catching themselves, or even other students are catching them and correcting them. I mean, you're talking about real learning in real time. Is there one for you?
I think, well, not a specific one. I just think that, as we said earlier, I don't know that there's a topic that you can't do this. And we're not going to probably pluck out every single little bit of information, but we're talking about the critical things. I look at how I've seen Mike Carroll teach penal code, and he spends a lot of time getting them involved with applying it to scenarios and then coming back. Even as a group, they come back and teach back. I see them sitting around in the break room and other classrooms, and they're discussing the different statutes, and then they come back with the statute, and they come back with examples of crimes or a scenario of a crime that match back to the statute itself. And I see that as a really good tool, because he could clearly stand at the screen and go, murder is this, and here's an example of what might constitute murder. And that's the model that, or the, I guess the visual model that he offers them. But when they're actually coming up with their own examples, I think it's much more ripe for retention. I mean, I don't know. Let's pick a topic. I don't know, just randomly. U.S. Texas Constitution.
Yeah, easy, super easy. Um, One, memorizing the amendments 1 through 10, and then the addition of 14 because TCOL requires it. That would be just mental gymnastics, frankly, and then the way that you teach it with aid, with the memory aids of sorts. But why can't I just turn the students over to it as well? Show them how to do it that way, and then say, hey, create your own. Create your own way to memorize it. Teach it back to your students. That's easy. Courts. You have a structure that you and I add from the Texas Judicial Branch. They structure it for us in sort of a hierarchy that they need to know, and then let the students decide. Maybe a little aside if that's okay, but knowing what we know about blooms, which if anybody's attended basic instructor, you get tired of that word, but blooms is an effective strategy for, I guess, detailing or speaking clearly about what you expect a student's cognitive load to be. And the magic here, like you said, maybe even a sleight of hand as an adjective, would be you're supposed to memorize it, but after the cadets have done or the students have done teachbacks in constitutional law, the trick is they're creating. They're on that real high end of blooms in the cognitive space, and so they're doing what you and I would do, which again triggers that magic in memory. And maybe too, to add, and this can be the same in force options or penal code or any of the core 7 that we've identified. But I also thought earlier, and I'd be curious to see what you think, could that also be, how do I liken it to, like a core memory, right? That, like when you won that trophy because you hit the game-winning home run, or to some students, they're so used to sitting there that they haven't had their time. I mean, I wonder, could this also serve as a core memory for them in the academy where they got to present and got to stand up there and almost be applauded?
Yeah, I think it does. It also almost creates like this little visual bank of reference, because they're teaching back the information, whether to the whole class, to us as instructors, or just turning and teaching it back to a partner, is a rep that has more depth to it. And I think that it goes a long way to retention. The other thing that I was thinking as well is, because you're talking about it being at a higher level, I think that there's little reward with the definition of bodily injury is the definition of whatever is. It's this rote memorization. But when we take it up multiple levels and they actually start to apply it. You think about, I need to know the definition of bodily injury. And if I say, well, go home and memorize that list. But then I say, but now I need you to know the culpable mental state. So go home and memorize those. And the practical application part of that would be a set of facts that you're able to identify someone was assaulted and they suffered bodily injury. So that's the practical application, but it's a much bigger reward when they can take those other pieces and start to get questions correct. Like, I need this foundational information to be able to solve this problem. But now in the teach back version of it, it's like, hey, we've given you this example. Give us more examples, because they're having to use the same information, but turn it around and use it in a different way. They're creating the scenario. So I know the Bloom's taxonomy, nobody wants to, go down that dark, dusty trail and get, clubbed over the head and drug into the bushes. But
Yeah.
if you think about Bloom's and how you teach, although the learning objective may be lower level, we should expect students in a police academy to be able to use that at the higher level. Practical application is police work. We have to teach to that level and test to that level, because if they can teach it back, they have no problems whatsoever on a typical pen and paper multiple choice test.
That's a fact. And if you don't mind, two things, please. There is a clear difference when you and I are asked to look at testing, when directors of academies or whomever will ask us about our opinions about how students are tested, or even performance and outcomes. It's pretty clear evidence to me that there might be a little bit of that. They taught like they were in 1989 a little bit, and how their test questions read, which is, all right, well, you're asking a really intimate question here on the test, but they don't know it because you didn't teach it in that way. I think there's something about that. I think once a student understands something from that cognitive area, that load, and it's not as big of a load, then yeah, they can recognize it on a pen and paper test or even a performance test. But there's a clear break, in my view, to when I ask a super complicated question. I can't be surprised as an instructor or a director or whomever that, yeah, they don't know it because they've never had to kind of wrestle with it in that way.
Yeah, the wrestling with it, the challenge for a lot of people, I think most people who are high drive enough to want to be the police, is probably rewarding in and of itself. We talked before we sort of went online with this about the reward that comes along with struggling with the information, getting it wrong, and struggling even more with the information. And I know I'm going to butcher it, but there's a part of the brain, I think it's called the anterior cortex or something along those lines, anterior cingulate cortex, that I maybe, I don't know if I nailed it or not, but it's sort of that part of the brain that if you screw it up, it's going to, you want to, it's like, I got to work till I get this right. I got to work till I get this right, versus giving up. And you look at some of the articles related to this, and there's strong evidence that people who have that high drive, or there are people that have that high of a drive, it's like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to keep doing it until I get it right. And then there are folks that they just quit. And I'm not looking for quitters. I think the profession deserves a whole lot better than that. And again, for the most part, I think we're getting the right people into our programs that they are willing to hit this head on, even if they're struggling with this. Like, they want to figure it out. The brain wants to figure it out, and I think that's a huge benefit. So part of our design should be making things challenging. Not
Yeah.
impossible. I don't want ninjas jumping out of the ceiling tiles on top of you when you're in the middle of a scenario. Unrealistic, obviously, unless you're in ninja territory, I guess. But besides that, they should be tough, winnable, so to speak. Tough, but where the cadet can figure it out. So having to teach a topic back is a little bit of a struggle because
Hmm.
you got to prepare for it. I mean, and that's I think the big part of the journey that's so beneficial to the student in retention is that they do have to put some work into it, a different type of work than sitting in front of, a bunch of flashcards and, oh, I've got all these memorized. Well, sure, that's there's a need for that too,
Hmm.
but to get to that higher level, to not only hang on to it, but the bigger piece is retain it for indefinite, hopefully, but to be able to actually use that information or that skill, because it's not just information, it's skill based too. I could say,
Hmm.
teach me how to put handcuffs on after you've seen it done multiple times, and I've seen students do that, and it's like, wow, they're catching their own mistakes that
Yeah.
they were actually doing before you had them do the teach back, and it's like they pretty well solved their own shortcomings there.
Yeah, absolutely. That struggle is a necessity, and the neurochemistry is ripe for change, which we both know learning is change. It's the uncomfortable truth sometimes that learning isn't rote. And it's a change of behavior, a change of understanding something. Why go to class if you already know it illogically? So the other thing, I was actually talking, if you don't mind, a quick aside. I was talking to one of our biology teachers at the college, and we happened to be discussing this because I'll nerd out with whomever wants to chat, and it did draw a good distinction because I told her that I noticed a lot of the times that I see students that they don't seem really engaged. They seem tired, and she brought up a really good point. It's what do you need with this information? In a college course like hers, like in biology, all they need to do to move on to the next course is to recognize the bones. Just this is what the bone is. There's no need to use it further. And so I guess it's and so into her point, her need to be rote is by design. But police officers, to your point, um, we don't have that. The next course depends heavily upon what we're teaching them in the academy or what you and I spend a fair bit of time doing in CE courses with officers, which is erasing myth and correcting problems. And they need to use that information now in the field under pressure. Whereas, again, these college students, let's just take in this biology class, they're going to go through another 3 years of just building slightly upon those. And so that it brought back a memory that I talked to her about that. And so why we invest so much time in this? Well, if anybody needs any uh, motivation to do this now, it's because the time is fleeting. You don't have your students for as long as you'd like. I mean, can you imagine going to school for 5 years or 4 years to be a cop? We wouldn't have any.
You say this, and my brain is spinning with the autonomy, relevance, and practical application to biology. So let's think about the student. So if I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to set broken bones, then the skeletal system is super important, or it should be super important to me because it's a foundational piece for me going to medical school or whatever functions that are discussed in biology. I think where we differ in the police academy, but maybe not really, is we're going to teach a U.S. Texas Constitution. And we sometimes struggle with the relevance piece of that because it's sort of lofty topic that we use to introduce the CCP and search and seizure. Maybe that's what biology is, because I could see it being very challenging to get the relevance piece to a bunch of biology students, maybe who haven't figured out where they want to go. If I'm, the student who comes in, it's like, look, I'm going to medical school. I need to know all there is to know about biology. I need to know all there is to know about chemistry, anatomy, and physiology. Then we tie it back to the relevance. And I look at our model autonomy piece is like, well, we're going to discuss the skeletal system for class today. And we're going to turn this into something that might be useful. Pretend tonight that you're going to be setting broken bones one day and apply maybe class or teach class in that direction instead of, I had biology, probably the same style that biology was taught to me is the same style it's being taught now. And I don't know that I can buy the argument that there's not a better way to do that, even in the academic side of things. Could probably step on some toes with that statement, but I just think that's the fact. I mean, you have to put effort into your curriculum design and make it useful or relevant for the people that are going to use it. Clearly, not everybody is going to be doctors or educators in the biology or chemistry fields. I think if you design your course around that, where there is a relevance to it, then you probably get better retention, and maybe less droopy-eyed students hoping that class will end sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree. Well, actually, yeah, I do agree. Of course, I do. That your point's well made, and I kind of stand corrected because it does lack something there, a little je ne sais quoi or whatever that we bring, by just kind of accepting the fact that it might not, and that's why we're not just open to police training, although I do think you still need the information in a different way. It still makes it more exciting. It probably opens up the students to a little bit more relevance, which adults need. And frankly, let's be honest, who's going through these classes? It's probably the majority are youth, 18, 19, 20-year-old young adults. Sometimes you find older adults going into the nursing field, but yeah, to find a little bit of relevance. And then I'm thinking, gosh, well, why don't you stand up there and have them teach back the bones and how they remember them and whatever. I definitely don't want to step on any phalanges. Just kidding. I didn't pay attention either, apparently, in anatomy and physiology. So, yeah, no, that's a good point. I think our information tends to be a bit more consequential, but teach back's one way. I don't know how we're doing on time, but there are many ways. In our program, you kind of agreed to allow me to do some mad scientist stuff, and I actually have our students build their own scenarios as well. And with proper vetting, I'll actually let the students run their own scenarios. And to your point, I've got to give our senior class right now a shout out. They created a scenario that I think is worthy of a textbook, utilizing different Fourth Amendment principles, and they put together a real zinger. I had to kind of step back and think real deeply about it, and that's not doable unless they understand it like you and I would be expected to understand it. I don't know if that's too simple of a statement, but that's just not doable without that.
No, but your cryptic monster's coming out again. So what's the scenario? Because now you got me curious.
Oh, well, no, I wasn't trying to be cryptic. I was just sharing. No, actually, so the students, we were covering once again the difference between Gantt and Carroll. And in that way, my whole point was to teach them that a good way to remember it in the field is once a driver is arrested, then that vehicle no longer becomes readily movable. And so I was looking through scenarios, and one of our students, Miriam Pineda, actually is what I was told, wrote a scenario where, and shout out to her because it was a zinger, where the driver was an Uber driver and who had picked up a passenger who had marijuana in the car, and that marijuana at some point was either in plain view or there was an odor. And so the scenario would unfold. Well, our class president or class captain and others that were helping run it um, were quickly to point out that, well, you're not arresting the driver because he admittedly said, I just picked this guy up like 2 minutes ago. I genuinely don't know him. And this creates an issue. It creates a search and seizure issue that in that scenario, I mean, that's just one, like I said, that you would need to know intimately. And then I did have the thought, to your point earlier, well, God, now that they're writing scenarios like this and performing them as classes, and I look out and they're doing radio communications, they're checking driver license, they're searching cars. I mean, all these different things, almost in a rote way where they're not even thinking about doing it. Surely on a test, this kind of lower cognitive load, they're going to recognize it and nail it. You know.
No, I think that's clear sort of evidence of, I mean, that's the top of the Bloom's taxonomy level stuff going on there. And they just don't get there with us lecturing at them in the classroom. It is really the teach backs to the point of being confident with the information. And I had that thought earlier, and I wanted to sort of plug it in, is when they teach back, I think the confidence increases multifold. And also, just sort of as a side note, they don't have to just teach it back once. I look at there's repetition that could be built into that as well. And I think soon we're going to break down the way we do our 5 core scenarios and sort of the repetition and the adding on to that and the benefits that we see. But if they teach back in real time and then we do that spaced repetition approach to retention that, again, science says works really well, that repetition could be come back and teach it again with some more depth to the point where it's second nature. You could almost put them in front of a classroom of students who don't know who they are, and they wouldn't know that they weren't an instructor teaching the topic because they get really thorough and really solid with the information, and especially in the key areas.
Oh yeah. Well, you and I have another class coming up on June the 2nd. I mean, we could run this model in front of them, with our senior class and see. Let's see how well. Or the other day when you were doing arrest, search, and seizure, did you see any of our guys in a teaching role?
Yeah, and to clarify there, I was teaching at another academy, and several of our recruits volunteered to basically be role players. But it was neat to sit back at the end of the scenario and watch them be able to debrief recruits from a completely different academy, and very thorough. And I didn't detect any sort of maybe animosity from the other recruits, that our folks were able to provide them a different sort of insight, quality feedback. I felt like they were a bunch of little Walt Juniors running around debriefing recruits from a different academy. So there's plenty of evidence that the teach back model works really, really well.
Yeah, and I mean, just to break this down, one, yeah, it's our core at Police Training HQ. But just to be clear, I don't even know if I need to, but just to be clear, you and I as trainers and as partners in both HQ and the way we train our academies, our autonomy, relevance, and practical application is at the core. That's what we do no matter what room we're in. no matter what we're teaching. We did a basic instructor this week. I had them do the same thing. I don't care of their level of experience. This is where it's at. And then autonomy, these cadets get to kind of choose and explain. They have a little bit of ownership of a concept, no matter who it is, even if the student. That relevance is that link, that idea to something that they give a crap about. And then I can put them, because you and I are supposed to be able to, we put them in a scenario or a call that's real, as real as possible. So that way they feel like they're a part of it. And then the application of it is they either verbalize it or they act it out as if they were going to use it in the field. That's just a fact. That's the application side.
So since you brought the class up from last week, the basic instructor course, because you taught that, and I just want to maybe embarrass you a little bit because I think it's some of the feedback from that class. I'm going to read it because I think it's important. Number one, it shows what folks are getting. And one of the quotes, one of the best courses instructors I've had, the instructor was very knowledgeable. The instructor's interaction with the class and use of teachbacks ensured we retained the material and were ready for our final presentations. And there's multiples, but I appreciate that you did that. It was when we see that sort of feedback and the fact, because I think every day that I was talking to you, you're saying, well, they're getting ready to do teachbacks. And I'm certain without even being there that they probably weren't sure what was going on when you first got them started with that. But just seeing some of that feedback. And these are seasoned police officers, not just recruits, but they're folks who want to be instructors. And if you wouldn't mind, just because you were there in real time, did you see that sort of evolution in their ability to present as we see in the retention of information from recruits with topics that are new to them, obviously in an academy program?
Yeah, well, thank you a lot. I mean, I really appreciate the shout out and thank you for the recognition. I feel like you and I both work hard at this, and I feel like you deserve the same recognition. So I'm actually sharing in that with you because that's something that you and I do, and you and I both deserve that. Those things, and that's me doting on you as well. Because let's be honest, if you thought it was lame, then you could quite literally say, "Hey, you're not going to do these things. You're going to stick to the script." And so I appreciate you in that.
Well, I appreciate it. I think when we teach together, usually they refer to me as the older, ruggedly handsome instructor, so it's easier to differentiate between the two of us. But no, I really do appreciate what you do, and I know we didn't even talk about me saying that, but I think it's important to point that out, that we're not talking the talk, so to speak. We're walking the walk, and
absolutely,
it's super important to see instructors want to do better in the classroom. And
yeah, well, and we had 8, so we wound up only having 8. I think we had 11 sign up. 8 showed up. One of them was actually one of my students from the time I was the director, and just been a big fan of this guy. And but other than that, I didn't really know anybody, which is fun, and kind of getting into that. And I promised them the same thing you and I've been promising, that there's nothing wrong with the PowerPoint, but that I've sort of adopted, and you and I have adopted, that PowerPoints can in some way take away from what you and I need to do in that course, which is explain some pretty difficult. I think it's difficult, even on the psychometric side with like learning objectives and things of that nature. And so I did what we normally do, which is teach it on the board. And in the ways that you and I have seen, I want to say failure points, but not pointing out any instructors or classes, but where you and I have to correct the most, I had them teach it back. And learning objectives was one of them. Some of the things that I wanted to add to was time, keeping up with their own time. I went from a 3-minute improv, which is pretty canned and typical, to 5-minute teach back and then a 7-minute teach back with preparation to demonstrate what prep can do for them. And actually, they were able to stay on track for 7 minutes and couldn't, most of them went over for 5. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of work. But my goal after our last basic instructor together, not the one in Mansfield, but the one in Alma, was to try to correct some of those failure points, even without resources and that were available, were unavailable to us. And learning objectives was one of them. And I don't think we had to correct anything. And so the evidence was there. I think learning objectives is hard when you see it. It's not just a statement; it's a measurable statement. And once they start to get that and correct each other, the other thing that most people wouldn't see is I had them write down their learning objectives day 2, and they were actually measurable and correct. But that was teach backs plus board work plus group study. Um, their lesson plans were thorough and complete, just like your class in Mansfield was. And so I think we're seeing similar outcome to that. And that's just prioritizing information that you and I both need to spend, I would say, quality instructor time, if there needs to be. Is you and I should be spending our time, in my view, explaining nuance and the reason behind some of this stuff.
Yeah, I see an evolution in our basic instructor. Obviously, we've got guardrails on either side with what the commission wants in the classroom. And when you were talking about that, it came to mind. There's a public comment copy of the revisions to the basic instructor course out on TCOL's site. And just kind of scrolling through it, I want to give it a little deeper dive, but just scrolling through it, I don't see a ton of change. And right, wrong, or indifferent. But I think that, well, I can't go indifferent because I look at it and say we're focusing on the wrong things, even in a basic instructor course. And maybe that's an episode. I'd really like to sort of take a look at what we have in that new course or what's being proposed and maybe have a discussion. And we may step on some toes, but again, just a deeper read. Maybe we look at that and make that an episode.
Absolutely.
Maybe we drag Malcolm into that one.
I'd love to, yeah.
That'd be a good discussion.
Well, and by the way, just as an aside, he emailed me and is ready to go. He appreciated our comments about him in episode 8 and just letting us know that he's still listening. And now that we're using this Riverside, I think it'll be much easier to connect. I'm just waiting for a few dates. So yeah, I'd be curious to what he thinks. And he also, I think, is wanting to sit in on one of our basic instructor classes. And so I haven't told him yet, but to hold on to his hair because we're going to blow it away.
Well, I think we're nearing an end point here. We've kind of drifted a little bit, but I think we've still brought it back to the goal of teach backs and the practical application that goes along with that. I don't know, maybe a closing sales pitch as to why every instructor should be doing this is in order.
There's a fishing, analogy there of just, and maybe I'll let you kind of go to that. But my closer is this. You might be leaving up to 70% of the brain's capacity to learn on the table. Because you spoke about, this has been a great episode and I just ruined it. You spoke about in a short recently you put out that the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. If you're not doing anything, simply going through it you're going to forget. And what we're doing, and I guess maybe this goes to what I'm asking, is what we're doing is prioritizing it faster and teaching our students how to study outside of class through affirmation and a teach back. And so I'm not going to say beg, because I don't, I still want us to get hired and get jobs. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm just asking instructors to consider the different modalities. I think teach back in our business and police business is super effective. And if you want to call it a call to order or whatever, is to simplify if I can teach it, I can claim to know it with some fix in between. That's my sales pitch.
Yeah, I think, and maybe you mentioned this on our discussion before we went online with this, but it's sort of the know it, say it, justify it. We're just kind of wrapping that into a a package that they're using in the classroom as a student, and I think that's a good method. It's a good sort of model to follow because we can measure that. A teach back is measurable because we can see it. You can see the information coming out of them, whether it's on the board or coming out of their mouth. You can pretty quickly figure out if they're getting it. And I think about, I don't know if it was Einstein was talking about, you to show that you know something or have a level of mastery, you got to be able to explain it in the most simple terms.
Yeah, it's definitely Einstein.
And yeah, and it's taking something that's complex and distilling it down to something that most people can understand, I think is in part our job. And we confirm that level of understanding by watching the student sort of teach it back to us, even if it's, again, in those simple terms, because I think for the most part, policing is in simple terms, or it should be in simple terms. Although we may have some complex legal things that set a foundation, we're expected to perform in the field under high stress and make decisions in sometimes milliseconds. So simple understanding and simple application is probably at the core of this job.
Absolutely. And I think I'll ask if this hits home to you, and we talk about it every time. Leave a comment, send us an email at info@policetraininghq.com. We still would love to connect. At least shoot us some comments. Heck, if you're in an academy, if you're an academy staff, an FTO, department training coordinator, anything, I'm reaching out to some with some flyers and some information about our website. But we want to help you bring this to life in your own program. In fact, you and I have designed an academy, what do you want to call it, methodology, like a support package that we could insert into a program. I know Sul Ross is having great success with that. Their guys take their test pretty soon, and so I'll be able to expound upon that a little bit. And we hope that this episode brings at least just one methodology. We'll talk about many more, but at least one methodology to the table. So, Mike, parting words other than this amazing episode?
No, I would love to see instructors sort of take up this approach with their own classes, in service or academy classes.
Yeah.
I think they would certainly see the benefit, and the students would probably reap the rewards from that. With some of the things you mentioned too, I guess maybe we ought to start reminding everybody we have some books available. Walt did a great job on an FTO manual for new graduates to sort of set a good path for themselves going into field training. We have you don't have to be right, you have to be reasonable book, Fourth Amendment issues that we've had good feedback about. We have our tests for the topics in the current police academy. We have a 400 question prep test for recruits that is helpful in preparing them for the state licensing exam. Out on YouTube, we have some presence on YouTube with some what we call copcraft videos and a few review videos that students find useful. We have some free resources in Quizlet under Police Training HQ. So again, some free, some paid, but we're certainly willing to share our time and our resources to better the training that officers are receiving in the state. So there's my little short sales pitch. You're a much better salesman than I am, but I figure maybe I should get some practice with that as well.
Well, it was great. I mean, you're right. We have the goods to offer, and Um, we will continue to push those out and add to them over time. And with that, I also wanted to add to, as requested, I think instead of making them podcasts, I think you and I are going to release a arrest, search, and seizure series, but it's going to be more of a video style, perhaps with some overlays and stuff that we're not gonna go off of training for the purposes of the podcast, but we will be releasing some of those arrest, search, and seizure kind of series videos explaining everything from reasonableness up to searching with and without warrant.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. So thank you again for episode 10, Mike. Congratulations on, for us, 10 episodes, and looking forward to the next 10, which I know will be great. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, stay smart, train hard.